All. In today's session, we are all going to learn about the ethical dilemmas and the ethics in business. So let's begin with the introduction over here that what is ethical decision making? Ethical decision making in terms of finance specialization, it's just refers a process of how the financial decision making to make how it would be guided by the moral principles and norms or values. It always aims to integrate all the financial actions whenever needed in order to ensure that the institutions and the individuals act honestly. The documents have to be transparent. It has to be done with the ethical principles. Ethical decision making also protects the norms of the interest, norms and interest in the well-being of all the stakeholders in an organization, whether it includes the investors, customers, employees, community as whole. It is also aims to identify the impact of the society either positively or negatively, which ultimately contributes to the social welfare of the society. And it also addresses the social challenges, the opportunities that exist in a particular organization or in the business scenario. It also aims to treat all the stakeholders fairly and equitably, as whatever the decision has to be taken is totally for the welfare of the society, which is based on a true and fair view without considering any nepotism, any favoritism, any discrimination in all the financial dealings and transactions. It should be fair and true view whenever the financial decision has to be taken on in a particular organization, whether it's related to the financial sector, whether it's related to any of the IT sector, etc. So this is a diagram which always based that all the financial decisions or all the financial actions totally based on the moral principles and values. Whatever the decision has to be taken related to the finance, it totally based on the social, on the moral norms, values, and principles. Or we can talk, in other words, we can talk about the ethical principles or values. Now we come up to the next section, that is ethical decision making in business. So, as I told that in particular finance specialization, the ethical decision making can be described at how it would evaluate the financial choices, how the managers, how the management heads evaluate the financial choices through or by following up the moral or ethical principles, which always seeks to uphold the integrity, the transparency, the fairness in all the financial actions and transactions. Especially, we can talk about considering the roots of the ethical decision making in finance. It always been seen, or you will take back, you will consider back to the ancient civilizations where the code of conduct or ethical guidelines, which always been established to govern the financial interactions. However, the modern concept of the ethical decision making in finance, it always gained a significant attention and prominence after several financial scandals and the crisis in the late 20s and early 21st centuries. So this is how the root, which has always been based on the social norms or ethical norms and values, but the modern concept of the ethical decision making, in particular, finance sector or the financial sector, it gains a significant attention and the prominence when the financial scandals or scams has been seen or has been arised in the late 20s and the early 21st centuries. One of the most notable events that always been brought us while making up or considering an ethical decision making in the businesses or financial sector. It always come from one of the major scandal in 2000, that was the Enron scandal in the early 2000. Enron apply it's a prominent energy company who engaged in the fraudulent accounting practices, misrepresenting the financial transaction, escaping the you can say showing escaping showing up the financial health and deceiving the stakeholders. This ultimately leads to the collapse of the company, and how he will you can say how he will face off the consequences faced by the employees or the investor, and ultimately it's a loss of the public trust in the financial institutions. So, following up such scandal, and in fact, there are also the subsequent financial crises, such as 2000. In 2000, there is a global financial crisis, and of course, there is a growing recognition of the need of the for formulating or implementing the finance ethical standards in finance to protect the interest of the investors, customers, and the overall stability of the financial system. Regulatory bodies and industrial organizations will always come forward to mainly focus the importance of the ethical standards or to deal with the ethical behavior in the financial sector or the business sector, which always aims to establish the various moral codes, guidelines, procedures, the best practices, so that it will take or it would save and secure the whole financial sector of India. In the recent years, the ethical decision making in business or finance has continued to evolve as one of the most significant impact of the corporate governance, investment practices, individual financial planning, which is a major focus to stabilize the financial sector, you can say, of the country, as the major companies, businesses, or the financial investors, it's always been an increase in number, which mainly recognize their financial decisions in terms of the social or the environmental impact, ethical consideration. They also been a major target. Which always plays a significant role in sustainable and the responsible finance in the country. Let's come to the next section, that is the process and the steps of the ethical decision making. The first step is to identify the ethical dilemma. It is a problem where the particular manager has to make a choices which ultimately it could not be acceptable, which is a major concern for taking care of the interest of the whole community, society, customers, etc. So it is very important to recognize the problem, to recognize the concern, whether it could be acceptable or whether it could not be acceptable, which always taking care the interest of the community, the whole community. So it will occur when any of the conflicting interests or any of the potential harms to stakeholders or financial decisions could always violate the ethical principles. So it always refers to all those problems, whether the organization is following up the ethical standards, whether is there any potential harm to the stakeholders of the company. So it is very important to identify the moral norms, the moral dilemma, which is a very crucial step at the initial stage for the further analysis of any of the problems or issues that might arise in a particular organization. So the next step is the gather relevant information. In this stage and step, it is very important to gather all the important and significant information related to any of the financial action or decision, whether such financial decision might include or relate to the understanding of the financial implications or potential risk, whether it could be the business or the financial risk, and of course, whether such risk would impact on all the stakeholders of the company or not. So, this is also very important to gather the relevant information related to the such scenarios, which definitely have a financial impact on all the stakeholders. Next one is the evaluate alternative courses of action. In order to consider the various options which are available to the managers, to the management heads regarding the ethical dilemma, which always not ready to accept to save or to secure the interest of the community. Instead of that, it is important to explore the different financial strategies, the investment choices, or the business decisions which ultimately follows the moral standards and principles in a organizations. Next one is apply the ethical frameworks and principles. So utilize the ethical framework and principles. It is also important to analyze the various alternatives which are available to the organization. So the common ethical you can say framework includes the unitarianism, which always maximize the overall welfare of the public, and deontology, which follows the moral values and the duties, and the virtual ethic, which always emphasize or focus on the personal character, so that such ethical frameworks which always helps to analyze the options or the financial alternatives which are available to the organization, that whether such framework will consider or you can say used in such particular alternatives, financial alternatives which are available to them. Next one is consider the legal and regulatory compliance. So it is very important to ensure that all the possible courses of action will definitely align with the applicable laws, regulation, and the industrial standards. So the ethical decision making in financial sector, it's go beyond the legal requirements, and of course the legal complements is still substantial. So it is also important to consider this step, whether any of the financial course of action has been followed the applicable laws, regulation, and industry standards. So it is also important to identify whether it was follows or not. Next one is it seeks advice and input. If the ethical dilemma is complex, then of course the input has to be considered from others, like the inputs that we considered from others. It could be colleagues, it could be mentors, it could be the ethics experts, etc. So it is also required to engage in discussion or open discussions with the diverse perspective, with the colleagues, mentors, ethical expertise professionals, which always gives us or to organization the more well-rounded understanding of the issue or concern that the business scenario has facing in it. Next one is once we you can say find out the whether such alternatives are followed with the legal guidelines or regulation. So the next section or the next step is to make the ethical decision. So based on the financial alternatives available, and after evaluating that and considering the ethical norms, it is very important to choose the course of action that which is the best deals with the ethical principles and values, and this decision which always be focused more on integrity, fairness, responsibility while considering or focusing on the well-being of the stakeholders. So if any of the organization is considering for the well-being of the stakeholders who are the asset of the organization, so definitely such organization is mainly focus on integrity, fairness, and responsibility. So whatever the financial decision has to be considered by them, it should be based on these three main aspects while considering any of the ethical decisions related to the finance. Next one is implement the decision. Once the ethical decision is made, it is very important to implement with transparency and integrity. It is important to communicate such decisions to all of the stakeholders of the organization. The more and more communicate about the reasons behind your decisions to the relevant stakeholder, in that ensures the ethical, you can see the considerations, so accordingly they can understand it. You can see that all the stakeholders can able to understand it if everything is openly uh, communicate to them about the reasons that why this ethical decision has been made. Next section is approaches of ethical decision making. The first one is the consequentialist approach. The consequentialist approach is always evaluate the actions, the financial actions, which is based on its outcomes, especially whether they have aligned with the ethical framework or ethical norms or values. So in the finance, such approach would logical approach is almost follows the moral principles and the duties which automatically guide that how to take a corrective financial action of a particular issue or the concern regarding considering the consequences of its outcome. In finance, this approach is mainly focused to adhere the ethical codes like honesty, integrity, fairness, and ultimately it would you can say or leads to a more and more profitable stage to all the stakeholders, which always aims to save their interest. If it is not being followed, then ultimately it would become a less favorable financial outcomes. The next approach is virtue ethics approach. Its virtual or ethic approach is always aims the importance of the personal character and the moral virtue in the decision making. Whether a particular manager have a sense of honesty, the prudence, the responsibility to consider in its own personal nature, and of course the values, the moral norms that they actually followed in taking up any financial decisions in the organization. So the ethical decisions are made by the individual who process and act such social norms, such moral values or principles in itself. The next one is rights-based approach. The right-based approach centers on respecting and protecting the individual rights and the fundamental freedoms. So automatically, when we talk about the rights-based approach, it's almost based on the rights, on the individual rights and fundamental freedoms. In finance, this approach requires to consider the rights of all the stakeholders involved, whether it could be investors, customers, employees, or the broader community. So this approach is mainly focused on to protect the individual rights and freedom, and in the financial sector this approach requires to think about to focus about the rights of all the stakeholders. in an organization. Next one is the social contract approach. The social contract approach is also based on the idea that ethical decisions is to be guided by a mutually agreed, or you can say the concern which ultimately benefits the society. The next one is the integrative ethics approach. This approach is also combines all of the elements who come up from different ethical frameworks or the principles to prepare the well-rounded and the comprehensive decisions. But it also acknowledges that the no single theory or principle is sufficient to prepare or to implement any of the comprehensive decisions for all or for all situations or the concern or the issues. The next one is ethical relativism. Ethical relativism is also focused on the ethical standards which are subjective in nature, and of course it considers the various cultures, individuals, and the society. So in the financial sector, this approach is to acknowledge the respecting, expect the diverse culture and relate to the ethical perspective. And it also considers the legal moral norms, the practices while making up the financial decisions of for any organization. And whatever the moral norms, it could be followed accordingly. The financial decision has to be prepared for the benefits of all the stakeholders, including the community as a whole. Next, this is a case or a case study or one of the example which always talk about or about the ethical decision making dilemma. So considering a multinational corporation that is Duck Out Private Limited, which is which involved in the mining industry. The company identified a promising mining project in the developing country which yields some very significant profits. However, the project is located in an ecological sensitive area with rich biodiversity, which could adversely affect the local communities and their way of life. This particular company faces the ethical decision making dilemma in whether the options, whatever is available, whether it could be acceptable or not. And this could proceed when the project and the potentially maximize their financial gains. But ultimately, such project which automatically affect the environment, which also disturb or become a hindrance or hamper the livelihood of the indigenous communities. And of course, it leads to a social unrest. So, in this particular situation or the case, the company takes the ethical approach by engaging in a responsible mining practices and conduct a detailed environmental assessment or the social impact assessment. Then accordingly, they will coordinate with the local communities. They are looking up the inputs and addressing their concern. And what are the concerns that the local, you can see the communities are facing while such project has been come up to their particular sensitive areas. And additionally, they implement and the company has implemented the measures to reduce the environmental impact, provide the fair compensation, and support the sustainable community development initiative. It means when any of the company come up with any of the project in any of the areas, definitely they should communicate and coordinate with such communities or local communities, take their inputs. Consider their concern and accordingly take a remedies or prepare with the possible solution remedies or the measures so that they can reduce that issue or the concern which adversely affect the livelihood of the local communities. So this is how the ethical decision making or the process of the ethical decision making would help to the company, that it is very important to follow up the ethical norms, to communicate, to listen, to address their concern, and accordingly the measures and has to be considered so that they will save their life in such areas which are who have lived up in so the entire life. The next one is, or the next section is, what is an ethical dilemma? So, the ethical dilemma, in other words, we can call the ethical paradox or the moral dilemma, which actually refers a problem in the decision-making process between the two possible options, and neither of the option is acceptable, which forms or which relates or followed the ethical perspective. So that's called the ethical dilemma. Whether that there is a problem that whatever the two options available that could not be acceptable, that doesn't fit any ethical perspective, and as a result, it becomes an ethical dilemma. We face many ethical and moral problems in our life, and most of are relate to the very straightforward solutions. And of course, we can find out the solution of our own or relate to our personal character or nature, which fits up the ethical perspective. On the other hand, the ethical dilemmas are extremely complicated challenges. It cannot be easily solved, it cannot be easily handled. So, the ability is to find out the optimal solution of your own using your, you can say your knowledge and experience, and based on such situation, and of course, it is also critical to everyone rather than the one who are simply find out the optimal solutions for such concern and issues. Every person definitely may encounter an ethical dilemma in in their own life or in every aspect of their life, including whether the personal, social, or the professional as well. So it is when we talk about the in professional settings, any of the manager definitely faces problem while choosing up of any two possible solution which is not acceptable uh, from an ethical perspective. So that's why ethical dilemma is also the one of the situation that everyone face of in a real life. How to solve an ethical dilemma? So these are the main 3 points, but the biggest challenge of such term that it does not offer any optimal solutions in minutes. And if it provided minutes, whether you need to verify or check on that it fulfilled the ethical norms or not. So throughout the history of humanity, people might face such problems, and the philosophers which always aimed and worked to find out the optimal solutions to such people. And there are the three main approaches to solve an ethical dilemma, which is the first one is refute the paradox. The situations, it is very important to critically analyze the situation, because in some cases the existence of the dilemma can be logically refuted, can be reduced, can be avoided. Value theory approach choose the alternatives that offers the greater good and the lesser evil. We cannot say that always the good will happen. You can say according to the situation. It is very important to make a balance of it. It's more good and the less bad. Next one is the find the alternative solution. In some cases, the problem can be reconsidered and a new alternative solutions may arise. So automatically totally depends that how you balance the problems and its solution, how you will resolve your problem while come up to a alternative solutions, and that solution would be very helpful to avoid such dilemma. So it is also considered a biggest challenge, but it's not be impossible to find out the solution of such issues and problems that might arise by the people. These are the examples taking credit for others' work. That is also telling us whether, because the options are available, but that doesn't mean that every option would work out, or else we can choose the best options. So this is also the taking credit of for others' work. So offering a client a worse product for your own profit, utilizing inside knowledge for your own benefit. This is called the ethical dilemma, which doesn't fit the ethical perspective. Then that's why it becomes an issue, it becomes a concern for the society, for the community as a whole. Ethical dilemmas in business. So the ethical dilemmas are specifically very significant in the professional life, because after all we face such situations, we face such concern. So it is important to find out the optimum solution that actually fits the ethical standards, the ethical norms. Some companies and the professional organization like CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, which always follows their own code of conduct or ethical standard. And if any of the concerned company or the professional organization it's violate such standards, then definitely it will lead to a disciplinary sessions. Almost every aspect of business can become a possible ground for the ethical dilemmas, and every business definitely face such dilemmas. So it also includes the relationship and how it would maintain the relationship with the co-workers, the management, the clients, and the business partners. So after all, it's a people inability that how they would determine the optimum solution for such dilemmas in the professional scenario. And of course, if not being possible, it could lead to a serious consequences for such businesses and organizations. So the situation may be common in companies, but the results are to be more valued in most of the situations. In order to solve the ethical problems, the companies and the organizations should develop a strict ethical framework, the ethical norms, principles, standards for their employees or employers. Every company should communicate the concern regarding the ethical norms within the organization. As I said, it is very important to conduct an open communication about any of the concern which relate to the ethical norms, or any of the concern which relate to such norms within the organization. And that is the ultimate solution to resolve any of the ethical problem that exist within or outside the organization, which has been faced by any of the employer of the organization. So in addition, you can say, or moreover, the companies may provide the ethical training for their employees as well. It is very important in order to conduct the research and development programs and the training programs for their own employees, so that they can deal and how they would deal with such ethical problems exist in an organization. So the training would be the must, which is an ultimate solution to resolve the ethical problems. Now we can come up to the next section, that is ethical navigation wheel, a tool for overcome the ethical dilemma. So this is also the wheel, a tool. This is also called a tool, so that the particular people who could overcome the ethical dilemmas. We are overcome from the ethical dilemmas. The ethical navigation wheel is a valuable tool which automatically designed to guide the individuals or organization in navigating the complex ethical dilemmas. So, as everyone in their own life faces a complex situations, how you can make up an ethical decision making which is good, more good for everyone. So automatically it was such tool has been developed by the Mercula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And this approach is also offers a systematic, you can say, framework to the ethical decision making and helps to identify those courses of actions so that in the most of the challenging situation. So it is very important to understand and how these will work and how the people or the organization would overcome the ethical dilemmas. So these are the four key components. The I stands for individual. So this particular component focus on the personal integrity and the ethical awareness that every individual should aware what is all about their values, their beliefs, the moral principle, so that these such particular variables would guide their decisions or would guide them to take decisions. And the key questions that arise or relate to this component is what are my values? What ethical principle do I hold dear? How do my personal beliefs fits with the ethical dilemma? The next one is we is community. This particular component focuses the impact of the ethical decisions on the various stakeholders because community is also a part of the stakeholders and it involves the perspective and the interest of all the affected parties including employees, customers, suppliers and community. But the most important part is the questions within itself, that whether such questions or the optimum solution of such questions will also be come up by these particular parties. So, who will be affected by the decision? What are the stakeholder interest and concern? How we prioritize their well-being? That means we stands for organization. How the organization protect the interest of all the stakeholders? Whether what are their concern and interest? So this is very important to find out the solutions or the answers of such questions before we turn into emphasize about the impact of the ethical decisions on the various stakeholders in an organization. Next one is them. Them stands for society. This component is also considered the broader social implications of the decision and always aims to look after, you can say, the stakeholders so that how the decisions are actually fits with the social values and norms. But as the questions has to be considered to think about their responses and the answers that how does the decision impact society at large? Does it align with the broader social expectations and ethical standards? So this is how we can think about the decisions which ultimately focus on the social welfare and which are aligned in entire the social values and norms. The last one is all, which stands for global, and this component, of course, refers to the analysis to the global context. So it also involves the you can say the decisions which have an ultimately impact on the global scale, including the environmental impact, including ethical consideration across the borders. But the most important is to think about the answers of such questions, which is very important and helpful to take up a decision and impactful decision on a global scale. So, what are the global implications of the decisions? How does it align with the global ethical principles and the environmental sustainability? So, here we are talking about the ethical strategies that we have to prepare to answer all these questions so that the ethical decision making could be prepared according to the complexing or the challenging situations. Next one is the overcoming the ethical dilemmas with the ethical navigation tool. So these are the various reasons that how you can overcome such ethical dilemmas. The first one is comprehensive analysis. As I told that it is very important to analyze all the four main components, that is I, we, them and all, and every individual needs a comprehensive understanding of the ethical implications of such components. Next one is balanced decision making. As I told, if you have an options or alternative or the course of action, but none of the action is useful that fits the ethical perspective, then ultimately it you have to refer more good or less evil or lesser evil. That means you are preparing up the balanced decision making, and such framework helps the individuals to balance the personal values and the interest with the well-being of the stakeholders, society, and the global community. So by integrating all, individuals can come up the more balanced and the principled decisions. Ethical reflection. The ethical such tool encourages the ethical reflection and introspection because it challenges individual to be to aware about the errors, mistake, the basis, which ultimately more thought or which ultimately they can more emphasize about the personal interest and promoting a more and more objective analysis of the ethical dilemma. Next one is the stakeholder engagement. Considering the perspective of the various stakeholders, it always increases the sense of empathy and responsibility. As the empathy and responsibility are also be a part of the personal, you can say, in nature or a personal character of the individual. So engaging such character in their decision making process also, which ultimately you can say improve the quality and ethical soundness of the final decisions. Next one is holistic approach. The ethical navigation wheel is also guides the individual to consider the broader ethical perspective of their decisions. And this approach, which also ensures the decisions which are fit with both immediate and the long-term ethical considerations. Next one is environmental consideration. As I told, the all, which is a global component, is also being significant to focus on the environmental sustainability. Taking account of all of the factors which have an economic, ecological impact of decision, it contributes a more responsible and the environmental conscious approach. The next one is ethical leadership. Such wheel is also become an essential tool for the ethical leadership. Leaders are always there to apply such framework so that they can inspire the team with the suitable examples who are help them to prepare the impactful decisions and create an ethical culture within the organization. And that's why such tool which also offers a structured, a comprehensive approach to ethical decision making, and by considering these four components, then definitely they will come up with more clarity, with more empathy, and the follows an ethical responsibility within the organization. And this powerful tool is also promote a thoughtful and the principled decision making in the organization, which also guides the individuals and the organizations to overcome the ethical dilemmas and, of course, upgrade and uphold the ethical values in their financial courses of actions. Next one is ethical dilemmas and stakeholder management. So, what was the relation between the ethical dilemmas and stakeholder management due to these three reasons? In recognizing the stakeholder, ethical dilemmas involve multiple stakeholders. It's a combination of all with their own interest and perspective. So, recognizing to deal with the unethical behavior, how to act when the such situation arises, how to promote their culture into the ethics within the organization. So this is some factors which ultimately helps for the growth and development of the employees that actually adhere the ethical behavior norms and values. How individual factors affect ethical behavior. So the first one is values conflict. So when any individual personal values clash with any of the ethical standards of the organization in a particular situation, then it leads to an unethical behavior. Situational influence, any of the strong situational pressures or opportunities, definitely they would tempt individuals to make unethical choices. So it is very important to have a strong personal value so that they can think about the pressure that they might face more and more in an organization before considering any unethical choices. Next one is leadership by example. Ethical leaders set a tone for the entire organization. So their behavior would also influence the ethical standard of the juniors. Next one is organizational culture. A sound ethical culture within the organization can support, reinforce any of their you can say ethical decision making, but a weak or unethical culture will also leads or influence their individual efforts. Ethical leadership principles. So first one is respect, that how you value your contribution, perspective, and of course the value and also value values their contribution of and perspective of team members. Accountability, taking responsibility to answer any of the actions and decisions that they took in within the organization. Service, focus on the needs and the welfare of the employees, customer, and community. Honesty, be truthful and be transparent in their communication and responsibilities or work. Justice, take a fair and equitable treatment for everyone. Community, it also foster a sense of belongingness and how you will engaged with the organization. So these are the ethical leadership principles which always helps you to take being as an ethical leader, to take up and decision ethical decisions making, and how you will and accordingly you take up you prepared with the impactful decisions within the organization. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening this lecture. I will come up to a more and more relevant and important topics in the upcoming session. So till time, thank you and namaste to all.